think this is a really sad chapter. Of course, it has all of that incredible action and beautiful moments, but the second half is what really gets me. The intimacy between Iori and Chihiro, the reflections of their life, what they're going through, the choices that they do and don't have. It's a very difficult pill to swallow, both for Iori, but also Chihiro himself. One thing that Hokuzono is really good at doing and that I absolutely love is contrast. And there is a ton of ways that this can be applied. He does it on multiple different surfaces, on multiple different occasions at the same time. So characters, their actions, their thoughts, their morals, how they perceive the world is usually contrasted very nicely with another character on the exact same level. The more intricate you make that contrast, the more flexible you can be in the duality between those two characters. But it's never just one. So you end up with this rotating door of contrast and dualities between so many different individuals, and they all kind of cycle back through Chihiro. Perhaps if not handled correctly, it could be very overwhelming, but Hokuzono has such a clear understanding of how much is too much and how much is too little, teetering on that fine line of application. There is a precise measurement to that contrast, and even more specifically, how it shifts. Hirohiko is someone that contrasts with Chihiro very, very nicely, and within a full package. His actions, his training, his mindset, his emotions, pretty much every characteristic is meant to, in some part, contrast with Chihiro. Whether it be opposites, whether it be similarities, whether it be dualities, whether it be comparisons, you name it. The more that you traverse back and forth between those two things, you create a sense of rivalry, but sometimes you also create a sense of companionship, love, even appreciation. Depending on what path you want to take, you can decipher what one of those options could be applicable, maybe even multiple options. In a case where Chihiro and Hiko are kind of rising together as these two front runners of power, having them channel each other back and forth is kind of poetic. It's very beautiful. Both of these characters are kind of brought away from their power originally, one being a sorcerer and the other wielding an enchanted blade. None of them can use that power, so they're back to basics, but also none of them can use a sword properly, so they have to learn. And it's creating those building blocks of companionship and duality that feels really, really special. They understand each other rather inherently. And while either side might not ever admit or convince themselves of that possibility, it is true. In turn, this does something really cool. Because they are so similar, you can show Chihiro's progression, funny enough, through Hirohiko. And the way that it is contrasted here is showing the physical application of Hirohiko's sword style. He does not have one. He doesn't have his sorcery, obviously, nor does he have his enchanted blade. So he needs to wield a sword properly. So what better way to learn than within the heat of battle? I will say I am incredibly disappointed in this hotel. As much as it claims to be a Switzerland, it has a 150-year life cycle that has passed down a generation of sword style. It's ultimately very weak, and this was something that I brought up. Because this hotel doesn't operate on a barrier or any sort of sorcery, it solely relies on the code of honor, meaning that anyone and everyone can use sorcery within this building, but the hotel will retaliate. Issue with the code of honor, and like I said prior, is that if someone is strong enough to just obliterate the hotel and its response, the hotel doesn't really matter and doesn't really work as a proper safe haven. For weak, timid, consistent individuals, sure, but for powerful people, not really. And what you are seeing is the direct consequence of that. Even though this hotel has 150 years of this sword style being passed down, and all of these swordsmen being different degrees of strength, the strongest is the general manager, Yojiro. What do you think happens to Yojiro? Very well trained, someone that is training other people. He gets killed by an amateur swordsman that does not have a sword style. This isn't to undermine Hirohiko. He is strong and he is incredibly adaptable. This chapter proves it tenfold. What this is meant to highlight is the irresponsible nature of this hotel, claiming to be some sort of Switzerland where no power should be utilized at all, being a supposed safe haven for anyone and everyone, but getting overpowered entirely by one individual. That is a disappointing hotel. Hiko is a very scary individual. He adapts to situations incredibly quickly, but he also perceives the world differently. Perhaps he perceives the world in a similar way to Chihiro, being able to see, react, and understand two differing sword styles. His observation to Yojiro and his sword style feels very integral to the type of person Hirohiko is, someone that understands, learns, and evolves. In turn, that leads to adaptation, being able to understand your opponent to such a degree where you, in turn, can adapt and evolve around it. Instead of trying to brute force your way through a brick wall, why not climb up and over it? This is the type of character that Hiko is, and considering this is basically the beginning for him, the heights of his strength, the heights of his abilities is absolutely endless. Yojiro is strong, but I think the consideration of his sword style being 150 years old, being dismantled and eaten by Hirohiko is a lot more impressive. Not to mention the sheer amount of other underlings that Yojiro has also trying to kill Hirohiko. On all fronts, he is outmatched, outclassed, outstrengthed, outnumbered, and yet because his sword style is so unorthodox, because he is quite literally free, he is unpredictable and he is able to devour. That level of freedom is going to be incredibly important for a world that perhaps operates very heavily on the sword style, its semantics, its specifics, the beauty, the class within it. Hirohiko is a bit of an anomaly. Someone that too could wield these type of sword styles, but to his own degree, meaning that he kind of cannibalizes the style in a very perhaps disgusting way, not limited to the stance itself, but utilizing more aspects of it, throwing his sword or changing hands or switching the blade around from front to back. All of these things would be kind of weird within a sword style, but he could utilize it, and in turn he can maximize the type of unknown that comes from it, almost like he's forging or creating his own sense of sword style through the consumption of others. Chihiro is on the exact same page, but doing it the opposite way, where he can manifest the sword style almost perfectly, but also utilizing the type of abilities eventually related to his enchanted blade. So on one hand, you have someone that's trying to perfectly master a sword style and can do it very rapidly, and then the other you have someone consuming sword styles and learning through them while forming his own sense of freedom, making him unpredictable. It's hard to imagine how this outcome will actually go. I don't think there's going to be a specific winner, but I will say that Chihiro is at a disadvantage currently. He has to protect Samura's daughter, which in a fighting stance is a little bit different. On the opposite side, however, Hiko needs to worry about the Musume ninjas. If they catch whiff of this, which they will rain down upon him rather quickly. And while I don't think the Musume ninjas could outright kill Hirohiko, I do think they can stop him in his tracks. But in saying that, the response to that is Toto and Kaguri, which I imagine he's on his way. So the battlefield kind of evens out rather nicely. The Musume and Chihiro fighting defensively to remove Iori from the situation, with Hiko, Toto, and Kaguri perhaps about to go all in. The sad part about this chapter is the conversation between Chihiro and Iori, and I really love how Hokuzono plays within that vulnerability. You're seeing a really rounded version of both of these characters because they're incredibly similar. Their fathers, their reception, their response, their reaction and understanding to this type of lifestyle, it's almost identical. The difference comes in painstaking details. Iori has partially a choice. She can forget all of this ever happened, forget her father, forget her previous life, and go back to what she loves. Chihiro unfortunately never had that option, and you'll notice that is something he lingers on. This was never a choice for him. This was a lifestyle that was forced upon him, a lifestyle that has been carved through blood and loss and sacrifice. Going back to contrast, a powerful point here is Iori's father Samura. When you connect him to Chihiro, he is someone that is actively trying to take the path that Chihiro is on away from him. You might think that sounds good, but you'll notice in here Chihiro lingers on options. He does not have anything outside of this. He does not have a life or friends or school or a family outside of this. The unfortunate path that has been forged for him, albeit being cursed, is the only thing that he truly knows. And while it's a sad path to be on, perhaps it's sadder that Samura is trying to take it away from him and not allowing him to decide or give him that choice. It is a complicated situation, thus making Samura a complicated individual, thus making the swords and everyone surrounding them complicated. While I am happy that Iori wants to go back to her normal life, unfortunately I don't think she's going to get that choice. It feels a little bit unbelievable to me that they can confidently protect her when someone like Hiko or Toto or Kaguri now knows what she looks like. So unless they're willing to completely change her identity on how she physically looks, there's too much information known about her. It's not as simple as just sending her back to school. The thing that she wants is to be with her friends and to live that previous lifestyle, but if she has to move, if she has to start again, completely unknown to all of them, is it even worth it? It is a somber moment, a reality check.